I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia standing at my front door with her arms crossed, and that pinched expression that made her look like she had just bitten into a lemon. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I had barely finished my first cup of coffee. "Marcus Owens, we need to talk about your flagpole situation," she announced before I could even say good morning. I leaned against the door frame, still holding my coffee mug. "Patricia, what are you talking about?" She gestured dramatically toward my front yard where I had installed a 20-foot flagpole the previous weekend. An American flag waved proudly in the morning breeze. I had put it up to honor my grandfather who served in the Navy during Vietnam. It looked perfect, exactly what the yard needed. "That monstrosity violates HOA regulations," Patricia said, pulling out a printed document from her leather folder. She was always carrying that thing around like some kind of weapon. "According to Section 7, subsection C, all flagpoles must not exceed 15 feet in height and require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee." "I wasn't aware of that rule," I said honestly. I had moved into this neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona just 6 months ago, and while I had skimmed the HOA documents, I must have missed that particular detail. "Ignorance is not an excuse," Patricia replied, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You have 72 hours to remove it or face daily fines of $100. She turned on her heel and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there feeling my blood pressure rise. I went back inside and dug out my copy of the HOA covenant. Sure enough, buried in the middle of page 47, there it was. Flagpoles limited to 15 feet. But there was something else that caught my attention. The rule only applied to personal flagpoles on individual properties. The community flagpole, located in the common area near the entrance of our subdivision, had no such restrictions mentioned. I spent the rest of the day fuming about it while I worked from home. I ran a software consulting business, which gave me flexibility but also meant I was around the house enough to notice all the ways the HOA seemed to target certain residents. Patricia had been president of the Sunset Hills HOA for 3 years, and in that time, she had made plenty of enemies. Just last month, she had forced the Hendersons to repaint their house because the beige they chose was 2 shades too dark according to the approved color palette. By evening, I had made my decision. I was not taking down my flagpole. Instead, I called my lawyer, Richard Chen, who I had worked with on some business contracts. "Marcus, HOA disputes can get messy," Richard warned me during our phone conversation. "Are you sure you want to fight this?" "My grandfather served his country for 30 years, I said. "I am not dishonoring his memory because Patricia has a power trip problem." "All right, let me review your HOA documents. Send me everything you have." The next morning, Patricia was back, this time with Dale Murphy, the HOA treasurer. Dale was a nervous man who always seemed like he would rather be anywhere else when Patricia was on one of her crusades. "Mr. Owens, I see your flagpole is still standing," Patricia said, making a show of taking a photograph with her phone. "It is, and it will remain standing," I replied calmly. Her eyes narrowed. "Then, as of today, you are being fined $100 per day until it is removed. These fines will be added to your HOA dues, and failure to pay will result in a lien being placed on your property." "You do what you need to do," I said. "I will see you in court if necessary." Dale shifted uncomfortably. "Patricia, maybe we should consider the rules are the rules, Dale," she snapped at him. He immediately went quiet after they left. I called Richard again. He had reviewed the documents overnight. "I found something interesting," Richard said. "The HOA rules state that flagpoles cannot exceed 15 feet, but there is an exception for flagpoles honoring military service. It is in Section 12, subsection F. I do not think Patricia read that far. So I am in the clear. Technically, yes, but you need to provide documentation proving your grandfather's military service. Do you have his discharge papers or anything like that? I have everything. My grandmother gave me all his military records before she passed away. Perfect. Send those to me. I will draft a response to the HOA citing the exception and demanding they rescind the fines. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but the relief was short-lived. That afternoon, I received an official letter from the HOA stating that my water usage had been excessive for the past 3 months, and I was being fined an additional $50 per month. It was obvious retaliation. My water usage was not any different from my neighbors, and I had the bills to prove it. This was personal now. Over the next few days, I did some research on Patricia and the HOA board. I discovered that Patricia had been making decisions without proper board votes, which was a violation of Arizona HOA law. I also found out that the community flagpole near the entrance had been purchased using HOA funds 5 years ago for $12,000. It seemed like an excessive amount for a flagpole, and I wondered if there had been any kickbacks involved. Richard sent the letter to the HOA citing the military exception, along with copies of my grandfather's discharge papers and service records. We waited for their response. A week later, I received a reply. Patricia had gotten around the military exception by claiming it only applied to flagpoles that displayed military flags, not American flags. It was a ridiculous interpretation, but she was doubling down. "This woman is unbelievable," Richard said when I showed him the response. "But here is the thing. We can fight this in court and we will probably win, but it will take months and cost you thousands in legal fees. What are my other options?" "You could take down the flagpole and put up a 15-foot one." "Not happening." Richard was quiet for a moment. "There might be another way." I noticed in the HOA documents that there is a provision allowing homeowners to purchase common areas if the board approves it and the majority of homeowners vote in favor. What if you bought the community flagpole? Buy the flagpole. Why would I want their flagpole? Think about it. If you own the flagpole in the common area, you control what goes up there. You could put up a bigger flag, better lighting, whatever you want. It would be your property, not the HOA's, and it would drive Patricia absolutely crazy. I started laughing. That is brilliant. But would the homeowners actually vote for it? Based on what you have told me about Patricia's track record, I think you could get the votes. A lot of people are probably fed up with her. The next day, I started going door to door in the neighborhood. There were 200 homes in Sunset Hills, and I needed a majority to approve the sale. I began with my immediate neighbors, the Johnsons, an elderly couple who had lived in the community for 15 years. "We would vote for anything that takes power away from Patricia," Mrs. Johnson said. "She tried to fine us because our rose bushes were growing over the property line by 3 inches. 3 inches, Mr. Johnson nodded enthusiastically. "You have our votes, Marcus." I moved on to the next house, then the next. By the end of the first week, I had spoken with 75 families. Most were supportive. They had their own horror stories about Patricia. She had fined the Torres family for parking their car on the street overnight when their son visited from college. She had forced the Patels to remove a decorative fountain from their backyard because it was visible from the street and was not on the approved list. She had even tried to ban children from playing basketball in their own driveways because the noise was disturbing the peace. But not everyone was on my side. A small group of homeowners, about 15 families, were loyal to Patricia. They liked the strict enforcement of rules and believed it kept property values high. Their unofficial leader was Brenda Callahan, who served as the HOA secretary. Brenda stopped me one afternoon while I was out collecting signatures for my petition to purchase the flagpole. "What you are doing is divisive," she said coldly. "Patricia has worked hard to maintain standards in this community." "Patricia has been on a power trip since day one," I replied. "And I am not trying to be divisive. I am just trying to honor my grandfather without being harassed. Your flagpole is too tall. Rules exist for a reason. The rules have an exception for military service, which Patricia is choosing to ignore." Brenda shook her head. "You are twisting things to fit your narrative. If everyone just did whatever they wanted, this neighborhood would fall apart." We were not going to agree, so I moved on. But I knew Brenda would be working against me, trying to convince people to vote no on the sale. 2 months into my campaign, I had enough signatures to call for a special homeowner meeting. According to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner could request a special meeting if they gathered signatures from 25% of the community. I had signatures from 35%. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the community clubhouse. I spent the week before preparing my presentation, gathering all the evidence of Patricia's abuse of power and working with Richard to make sure my purchase offer was legally sound. The day of the meeting arrived and the clubhouse was packed. I had never seen so many neighbors in one place. Patricia sat at the front table with Dale and Brenda, looking like she was ready for battle. "This meeting is out of order," Patricia announced before I could even start. "The purpose of special meetings is to address emergency matters affecting the community. This is not an emergency." Richard stood up. "Actually, according to Arizona Revised Statutes Section 33-1609, any homeowner has the right to call a special meeting for any matter they deem important. The bylaws of your HOA echo that statute. This meeting is perfectly legal." Patricia's face turned red, but she sat down. I walked to the front and set up my laptop to display a presentation on the screen. "Thank you all for coming. I know everyone is busy, so I will get right to the point. I am here today to propose purchasing the community flagpole and surrounding common area from the HOA. Before you ask why, let me give you some context." I explained the situation with my own flagpole, showing the military exception in the rules that Patricia was ignoring. I displayed photos of my grandfather in his Navy uniform, his medals, and his service records. Several veterans in the audience nodded approvingly. Then I moved on to the bigger issue. "But this is not just about my flagpole. This is about a pattern of harassment and abuse of power by the current HOA board. Let me show you some examples." I went through slide after slide documenting Patricia's actions over the past 3 years. The unreasonable fines, the selective enforcement of rules, the decisions made without proper board votes. I had done my homework, and the evidence was damning. Now, you might be wondering what buying the community flagpole has to do with any of this, I continued. The answer is simple. If I purchase the flagpole and the small parcel of land it sits on, it becomes my property. I will maintain it better than the HOA has, and I will ensure it is a proper tribute to all the veterans in this community. Plus, it removes one more thing from Patricia's control. Brenda jumped up. "This is ridiculous. You cannot just buy community property because you are throwing a tantrum." "I am not throwing a tantrum," I said calmly. "I am exercising my rights as a homeowner under the bylaws. And for the record, I am offering $15,000 for the property, which is more than the HOA paid for it originally." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. $15,000 was a significant amount of money that could go toward community improvements. Dale stood up, looking nervous. As treasurer, I have to admit that $15,000 would be very helpful. We have been discussing repaving the community tennis courts, and this would cover most of that cost. Patricia shot him a look that could kill, but the damage was done. People were interested. We opened the floor for discussion. Several homeowners spoke in favor of the sale. Tom Henderson, whose house had been forced to be repainted, gave a passionate speech about standing up to bullies. Maria Torres talked about how the HOA had made her son feel unwelcome in his own family's home. Even quiet Dale seemed to be leaning toward supporting the sale. But Patricia was not going down without a fight. She took the microphone and launched into a 15-minute tirade about the importance of rules, the dangers of setting precedents, and how I was trying to destroy the community. It was so over the top that people actually started checking their phones and whispering to each other. When it finally came time to vote, Richard reminded everyone that this required a simple majority of homeowners present. There were 163 people in the room, representing 138 homes. We needed 70 votes. The ballot was simple: yes to approve the sale, no to reject it. We used paper ballots to ensure privacy, and 3 neutral homeowners volunteered to count. The 20 minutes it took to count the votes felt like hours. I stood off to the side with Richard, trying to read the room. Some people looked supportive, others looked skeptical, and a few looked like they just wanted to go home. Finally, one of the counters, Janet Martinez, approached the microphone. The results are in. Of the ballots cast, 92 voted yes, 41 voted no, and 5 were invalid due to unclear markings. The room erupted. 92 votes. I had won by a landslide. Patricia stood up so fast her chair fell backward. This is a farce. I demand a recount. We counted 3 times to be sure, Janet said firmly. The vote stands. Over the next few weeks, Richard and I worked with a real estate attorney to finalize the purchase. Patricia tried every trick she could think of to block it. She claimed the vote was invalid because not all homeowners were present, but Arizona law only required a majority of those in attendance. She tried to argue that the common area could not be sold, but the bylaws specifically allowed for it. She even threatened to sue me personally, but Richard shut that down immediately. The closing took place on a Wednesday morning at a title company in downtown Phoenix. Dale was there representing the HOA, looking relieved that this whole mess was almost over. Patricia had refused to attend, sending Brenda in her place, but Brenda had no legal authority to block the sale. I handed over a check for $15,000, signed a mountain of paperwork, and walked out as the proud owner of a flagpole and a small parcel of land in the Sunset Hills common area. The first thing I did was hire a professional flagpole company to do a full inspection and cleaning. The pole was in decent shape, but had not been properly maintained in years. The lighting was outdated, the rope was frayed, and the flag itself was faded and torn. I ordered a new American flag, the biggest one that would fit on the pole, along with a proper lighting system that would illuminate it at night. I also had a bronze plaque installed at the base, dedicating the flagpole to all veterans from the Sunset Hills community. I included my grandfather's name, along with an invitation for other families to add their loved ones' names if they wanted. The transformation was stunning. The flagpole went from being a neglected afterthought to a proud symbol of the neighborhood. People started stopping by to take photos and read the plaque. Several families reached out to me asking to add names, and within a month, we had 15 veterans honored on the plaque. But I was not done yet. Remember my original flagpole, the one on my property that started this whole mess? I still had not taken it down, and Patricia was still insisting I do so. I decided to have some fun with it. I replaced the American flag with a military service flag, specifically a Navy flag to honor my grandfather. According to the HOA rules, flags honoring military service were explicitly allowed with no height restrictions. Patricia could not touch it. When she saw the Navy flag, she showed up at my door the next day. "You think you are clever, do you not?" she spat. "I think I know how to read," I replied. "The rules clearly state military service flags are permitted." "That flag is the wrong shade of blue." I could not help it. I laughed right in her face. "Patricia, there is no approved color palette for military flags. You are grasping at straws." She stormed off, and I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 days later, I received a notice that I was being fined for excessive noise. The flagpole rope, according to Patricia, was clanging against the pole and disturbing the peace. I installed rubber sleeves on the rope the same day, eliminating any noise. Then I filed a formal complaint against Patricia with the HOA board for harassment. The complaint triggered a series of events I had not anticipated. Once one person files a formal complaint, it opens the door for others. Within a week, 12 other homeowners had filed complaints against Patricia. The accusations ranged from selective rule enforcement to verbal abuse to making board decisions without proper votes. The HOA board was required to hold a hearing to address the complaints. Dale, as treasurer, was tasked with leading the hearing since Patricia was the one being accused. He looked like he wanted to resign on the spot. The hearing was held on a Thursday evening, and once again, the clubhouse was packed. This time, though, the mood was different. People were not just frustrated anymore. They were angry, one by one. Homeowners stood up to tell their stories. The Hendersons talked about the cost of repainting their house. The Torres family described how their son now refused to visit because he did not feel welcome. An elderly woman named Grace Spencer broke down in tears as she described how Patricia had fined her for having weeds in her yard when she was recovering from hip surgery and could not maintain it herself. It went on for 3 hours. Patricia sat at the front table, her face a mask of fury and defiance. She tried to interrupt several times, but Dale, finally finding his spine, told her to remain silent until everyone had spoken. When it was finally her turn to respond, Patricia gave a speech about how she was just enforcing the rules and that people needed to respect authority. She showed no remorse, no empathy, no acknowledgement that she might have been too harsh. That was her biggest mistake. At the end of the hearing, Dale called for a vote. According to the bylaws, a board member could be removed if 2/3 of homeowners voted in favor. We had 190 people at the hearing. We needed 127 votes. The vote was not even close. 158 people voted to remove Patricia from the HOA board. Only 27 voted in her favor and 5 abstained. Patricia stood up, her face pale. For the first time since I had met her, she looked genuinely shaken. "You will all regret this," she said quietly before walking out. The room erupted in applause. With Patricia gone, the HOA board needed a new president. Several people suggested I run, given that I had been the catalyst for the change, but I declined. I had no interest in being on the board. Instead, Tom Henderson agreed to take the position. He was a retired teacher with a calm demeanor and a genuine interest in making the community better. One of Tom's first acts as president was to review all the fines that had been issued over the past 3 years. He discovered that Patricia had collected over $200,000 in fines, far more than any HOA of our size should have been generating. Some of the fines were legitimate, but many were questionable or outright vindictive. Tom formed a committee to review each case. Homeowners who had been unfairly fined were given refunds. My fines for the flagpole and water usage were among those refunded, totaling over $3,000. But the story does not end there. Remember how I mentioned wondering if there had been any kickbacks when the original flagpole was purchased? That question kept nagging at me, so I did some digging. Using public records requests, I obtained copies of all HOA financial transactions over the past 5 years. What I found was shocking. The flagpole had been purchased from a company called Desert Landscaping Solutions for $12,000. A quick internet search revealed that Desert Landscaping Solutions was owned by Patricia's husband, Gary. That was not all. Over the past 5 years, the HOA had paid Desert Landscaping Solutions over $150,000 for various services, far more than any other vendor. And many of those services were either never performed or charged at rates well above market value. I brought this information to Tom, who immediately contacted an attorney. The attorney advised us to file a complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office, which handles HOA fraud cases. The investigation took 6 months. During that time, Patricia tried to flee. She put her house up for sale and was planning to move to Nevada. But before she could leave, the Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against her and her husband for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The case went to trial the following spring. I was called to testify about my initial investigation into the flagpole purchase and the financial records I had uncovered. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Patricia try to justify her actions was surreal. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. They showed how Patricia had steered HOA contracts to her husband's company, how she had inflated costs and charged for work that was never done, and how she had used her position as HOA president to enrich herself and her family. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all counts. Her husband was found guilty on most counts, though he managed to avoid conviction on a few of the lesser charges. At sentencing, the judge was not sympathetic. Patricia received 3 years in state prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, totaling over $100,000. Her husband received 2 years and was also ordered to pay restitution. As I sat in the courtroom watching the sentence handed down, I thought about how this all started with a simple flagpole. I had just wanted to honor my grandfather. Instead, I had uncovered corruption, rallied a community, and helped bring a criminal to justice. After the trial, life in Sunset Hills slowly returned to normal. Tom turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined the rules, eliminating many of the petty regulations that Patricia had enforced. He created a community garden, organized neighborhood events, and actually listened to homeowners' concerns. The flagpole I purchased became a source of pride for the neighborhood. We held a dedication ceremony on Veterans Day, where local veterans were invited to speak and share their stories. My grandfather's photo was displayed prominently, along with photos of other veterans from the community. It was a beautiful event, and I wished my grandfather could have been there to see it. As for my own flagpole, it still stands proudly in my front yard, flying a Navy flag. No one has complained about it since. In fact, several other homeowners have installed their own flagpoles to honor their family members who served. It has become a symbol of our community's respect for those who sacrificed for our country. One evening about a year after everything had settled down, I was sitting on my front porch enjoying the sunset when Tom stopped by. "I wanted to thank you," he said, settling into the chair next to me. "If you had not stood up to Patricia, who knows how long she would have gotten away with it." "I was just trying to keep my flagpole," I said with a smile. "You did a lot more than that. You reminded us that we do not have to accept being bullied, not even by people in positions of authority." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon and the lights on my flagpole illuminated the Navy flag. "You ever think about running for the board?" Tom asked. "We could use someone like you." I shook my head. "I am happy being a regular homeowner. But I will keep showing up at meetings and speaking up when something is not right." "That is all any of us can do," Tom said. After he left, I went inside and pulled out an old photo album my grandmother had given me. It was filled with pictures of my grandfather during his Navy years. Young and strong, standing on the deck of a ship somewhere in the Pacific. I had looked at these photos countless times, but tonight they felt different. I felt like I had honored his memory in a way that mattered. The next morning, I received an email from Dale, who had remained as HOA treasurer under Tom's leadership. The HOA had received the first restitution payment from Patricia and her husband. The money was being used to fund long overdue repairs around the community, including repaving the tennis courts and updating the playground equipment. It felt good knowing that Patricia's fraud was being undone, that the money she had stolen was being returned to benefit the community she had harmed. But not everything wrapped up neatly. Brenda remained as HOA secretary, and while she was no longer openly hostile, she made it clear she thought I had destroyed something good by going after Patricia. We maintained a polite but distant relationship. A few months later, I was contacted by a reporter from the Arizona Republic who was writing a story about HOA corruption. She had heard about what happened in Sunset Hills and wanted to interview me. I agreed, figuring it might help other homeowners who were dealing with similar situations. The article ran on a Sunday and went viral online. I started getting emails and calls from people all over Arizona, and even from other states, asking for advice on how to deal with their own abusive HOA boards. I never intended to become some kind of HOA reform advocate, but that is what happened. I started a blog sharing what I had learned, offering practical advice on how to review HOA documents, how to organize homeowners, and how to spot financial irregularities. The blog grew quickly. Within 6 months, I had over 50,000 regular readers. I started getting invited to speak at homeowner meetings and community events. I even testified before the Arizona State Legislature when they were considering new HOA reform laws. Through it all, I kept my day job running my software consulting business. The blog and advocacy work was something I did in my spare time, driven by a belief that homeowners should not have to live in fear of petty tyrants who abuse their power. One of the most rewarding aspects was hearing from other people who had successfully stood up to their HOA boards. A man in Tucson used the information from my blog to uncover embezzlement by his HOA president. A woman in Flagstaff organized her neighbors to remove a board that was imposing ridiculous fines for minor infractions. Each story reminded me that change was possible when people were willing to fight for it. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Patricia. She was writing from prison, and the tone was bitter. She blamed me for ruining her life, claimed she had been unfairly targeted, and insisted she had only been trying to maintain high standards in the community. I read the letter once and threw it away. Some people never learn. Around that same time, I started dating someone I met at a community event. Her name was Jennifer Davis, and she worked as a nurse at a hospital in Phoenix. She had her own HOA horror story involving a board that tried to fine her for having a garden in her backyard. We bonded over our shared frustration with petty bureaucrats. Jennifer was understanding about my somewhat unusual claim to fame as the guy who took down a corrupt HOA president. She even helped me with the blog, contributing articles about dealing with the stress of HOA disputes and knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood was thriving under Tom's leadership. My business was doing well. My relationship with Jennifer was growing stronger, and my grandfather's Navy flag still flew proudly on the flagpole in my front yard. One day, about 3 years after everything started, I was working in my home office when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find an elderly man in a Navy veteran's cap. "Are you Marcus Owens?" he asked. "I am. I am Frank Wilson. I live over on Maple Street. I just wanted to shake your hand and thank you for what you did with the community flagpole. My son served in the Navy, and seeing his name on that plaque means the world to me." We talked for a while, and he shared stories about his son's service. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, it is easy to complain about problems. It is a lot harder to actually do something about them. You did something, and it made a difference." After he left, I thought about that. I had not set out to make a difference. I had just wanted to keep my flagpole. But sometimes life pushes you in directions you do not expect, and you have to decide whether to go along or push back. I chose to push back, and it changed everything. The blog continued to grow, and I started getting requests to write a book about my experience. I resisted at first, thinking my story was not that interesting, but Jennifer convinced me otherwise. "People need to hear this," she said. "They need to know they have power, even when it feels like they do not." So I started writing. It took me almost a year, working on it in the evenings and on weekends. The book, titled Standing Up to the HOA, One Man's Fight Against Corruption and Abuse of Power, was published by a small press that specialized in consumer advocacy books. I did not expect much from it, but it struck a chord. The book sold steadily, and I started getting invited to do more speaking engagements. I appeared on local news programs and even did a segment on a national morning show. Through it all, I tried to stay grounded. I was not some crusader or hero. I was just a guy who refused to be bullied and happened to uncover something much bigger in the process. 4 years after Patricia went to prison, she was released on parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had moved to a small town in New Mexico. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but I doubted it. By that point, I had moved on completely. Jennifer and I got married in a small ceremony at a park near our neighborhood. The flagpole I had purchased stood in the background of our wedding photos, the American flag waving in the breeze. We talked about moving to a bigger house, maybe one without an HOA, but we decided to stay in Sunset Hills. The community had become home, and we had good friends there. Plus, I liked being able to walk by the flagpole and see my grandfather's name on that bronze plaque. Tom served as HOA president for 5 years before deciding to step down. He was replaced by Maria Torres, who brought the same thoughtful leadership style. The neighborhood continued to thrive. My blog evolved over time. I brought on other contributors, people who had their own stories of standing up to HOA boards. We created resources to help homeowners understand their rights, review financial documents, and organize effectively. The Arizona legislature passed several HOA reform laws, including requirements for more financial transparency and limits on the fines boards could impose. I like to think my testimony and advocacy work played a small role in making those changes happen. 5 years after everything started, Jennifer and I had our first child, a daughter we named Grace, after the elderly woman who had broken down in tears at the hearing talking about Patricia's cruelty. We wanted our daughter to grow up understanding the importance of standing up for what is right. One evening, when Grace was about 6 months old, I was sitting on the front porch holding her and watching the sun set. The Navy flag on my flagpole rippled in the breeze, and I could see the lights starting to come on at the community flagpole down the street. I thought about everything that had happened. The fight with Patricia, the investigation, the trial, the reforms that followed. It all started because I wanted to honor my grandfather, and it ended up changing an entire community. Grace made a small sound and grabbed at my finger. I looked down at her and smiled. "Your great-grandfather was a good man," I told her. "He served his country with honor, and that flagpole up there, that is for him. It is a reminder that some things are worth fighting for." She did not understand, of course. She was just a baby. But someday she would, and I hoped she would learn from my example that standing up to bullies and fighting for what is right is always worth it, even when it is hard. The neighborhood continued to evolve. New families moved in, bringing fresh energy and ideas. The HOA under Maria's leadership focused on building community rather than enforcing petty rules. We had regular block parties, a thriving community garden, and an active neighborhood watch program. The flagpole remained a centerpiece of the community. More names were added to the plaque as families learned about the opportunity to honor their veterans. We held a ceremony every Veterans Day and Memorial Day, with local veterans invited to speak and share their experiences. I stayed involved in HOA reform work, but it was no longer the center of my life. I had my family, my business, and my community. The blog continued with help from other contributors, and the book continued to sell steadily, but I was content to let others take on more of the advocacy work. One day, about 7 years after the initial conflict with Patricia, I received a call from Richard Chen, my lawyer who had helped me through everything. "Marcus, I have some news you might find interesting," he said. "Patricia's husband just declared bankruptcy. They have been unable to keep up with the restitution payments. What happens now? The HOA will likely never see the full amount they are owed, but the court might allow them to seize assets, including property." I thought about that. Part of me felt vindicated. They had stolen from the community and were facing consequences. But another part of me just felt tired of the whole thing. "It is over, Richard. Whatever happens to them now is between them and the courts. I am done." "I figured you would say that. You have moved on, and that is probably the healthiest thing you could do." After I hung up, I sat quietly for a while. Jennifer came in and could tell something was on my mind. "You okay?" she asked. "I just got word that Patricia and her husband are bankrupt. They cannot pay back what they owe." Jennifer sat down next to me. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, I do not feel much of anything. That whole chapter of my life feels like it happened to someone else." She squeezed my hand. "That is growth. You did what needed to be done, and now you have moved on." That is exactly how it should be. The years continued to pass. Grace grew into a curious, energetic toddler. We had a son, Michael, 2 years later. I watched them play in the front yard near the flagpole that had started everything, and felt grateful for the life we had built. The community flagpole that I had purchased eventually needed significant repairs. The pole itself was structurally sound, but the base had deteriorated and needed to be rebuilt. I paid for the repairs out of pocket, considering it my responsibility as the owner. During the renovation, we discovered that someone had vandalized the bronze plaque, scratching off several of the veterans' names. I was furious, but Tom, still active in the community despite no longer being president, helped me see it differently. "Whoever did this is small and angry," he said. "Do not let them have power over you. We will fix the plaque, make it even better than before, and move on." He was right. We had a new plaque made, this time with more durable materials and a protective coating. We added even more names, including some veterans who had passed away since the original plaque was installed. The new dedication ceremony was attended by over 200 people from the neighborhood. I gave a short speech at the ceremony, talking about my grandfather and the importance of honoring those who served. But I also talked about the broader lesson I had learned through this experience. This flagpole represents more than just military service, I said. It represents what happens when a community comes together for a common purpose. It represents standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. And it represents the idea that one person can make a difference if they are willing to try. The applause was thunderous, and I felt a swell of emotion. This was no longer about me versus Patricia. It was about something much bigger. As Grace and Michael grew older, they asked questions about the flagpole and why it was so important to our family. I told them stories about their great-grandfather, about his service in the Navy, about the values he believed in. But I also told them about Patricia, about standing up to bullying and corruption, about the importance of doing what is right even when it costs you something. They were too young to fully understand, but I knew the lessons would sink in over time. 10 years after the initial conflict, I received an invitation to speak at a national HOA reform conference in Washington, D.C. The conference brought together homeowners, lawyers, legislators, and advocates from across the country to discuss ways to reform HOA laws and protect homeowners from abuse. I gave a keynote speech telling my story, from the initial conflict over the flagpole to uncovering Patricia's corruption to the reforms that followed in our community and state. The response was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to shake my hand, share their own stories, and ask for advice. One person who approached me was a young lawyer from Florida who was working on HOA reform legislation in his state. "Your story is exactly what we need to show legislators that this is a real problem," he said. "Would you be willing to come to Florida and testify before the state legislature?" I hesitated. I had already spent years on this issue, and I was ready to focus more on my family and my business. But then I thought about all the people who had reached out to me over the years, desperate for help in dealing with their own HOA problems. If I could help prevent even a few people from going through what I went through, it was worth it. "Yes," I said, "I will come." Over the next 2 years, I testified before legislatures in Florida, Nevada, Colorado, and Texas. Each state was considering HOA reform legislation, and my story served as a real-world example of why those reforms were needed. It was exhausting and time-consuming, but it felt meaningful. I saw laws passed that increased financial transparency, limited the fines HOA boards could impose, and created easier processes for homeowners to remove abusive board members. Each new law represented progress, a small step toward protecting homeowners from the kind of abuse I had experienced. Throughout all of this, the flagpole in my front yard continued to fly proudly. I replaced the Navy flag periodically when it became worn, but it was always the same design, the same tribute to my grandfather. It had become such a fixture in the neighborhood that new residents often asked about it, and I was always happy to share the story. The community flagpole I owned had also become a landmark. People used it as a reference point when giving directions. "Turn left at the big flagpole with the plaque." It made me smile every time I heard it. 12 years after everything started, I received a letter from the Arizona Department of Corrections. Patricia was requesting early termination of her parole. As a victim in the case, I was being asked if I wanted to submit a statement to the parole board. I thought long and hard about it. Part of me wanted to write a scathing statement about how she had shown no remorse, how she had blamed everyone but herself for her actions. But ultimately, I decided to write a brief statement saying I had no objection to her parole being terminated. She had served her time, and I had no desire to prolong her punishment. "Are you sure?" Jennifer asked when I told her about my decision. "After everything she put you through, I am sure. Holding on to anger only hurts me, not her. She is gone from our lives, and I want to keep it that way." Jennifer hugged me. "You are a better person than I am. I would have wanted her to suffer more," I laughed. "Trust me," I thought about it, "but I am tired of giving her any space in my head. This is me finally letting go completely." A few months later, Patricia's parole was terminated, meaning she was free from all court supervision. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working as a cashier at a grocery store in New Mexico and living in a small apartment with her husband. It was a dramatic fall from the position of power she once held, but I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. I just felt glad it was over. As the years continued to pass, my story became less about me and more about the movement it inspired. HOA reform became a real issue that legislators took seriously. Consumer advocacy groups formed specifically to help homeowners deal with abusive HOA boards. My book was used as a reference in law school classes about property rights and homeowner associations. I was proud of what had been accomplished, but I was also ready to step back. I had spent over a decade fighting this fight, and it was time for others to carry the torch. On the 15th anniversary of the day I first installed my flagpole, the neighborhood organized a surprise celebration. They gathered in my front yard, over 300 people from the community, to thank me for what I had done. Tom gave a speech talking about how the neighborhood had changed for the better. Maria talked about the reforms that had been implemented. Several veterans spoke about what the community flagpole meant to them. Then Grace, now 15 years old and confident beyond her years, stood up to speak. "My dad did not set out to be a hero," she said. "He just wanted to honor his grandfather, but when someone tried to stop him, he fought back. And in fighting back, he made things better not just for himself, but for everyone. That is what I have learned from him. That is what I hope to do in my own life." I was not ashamed to admit I had tears in my eyes as she spoke. This was why I had fought so hard. Not for recognition or glory, but to make things better for my family and my community. After the celebration, I stood in front of my flagpole looking up at the Navy flag. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the neighborhood. I thought about my grandfather, about the example he had set through his service. I hoped he would be proud of what I had done to honor his memory. Jennifer came up beside me and slipped her hand into mine. "No regrets?" she asked. "None," I said. "It was hard and there were times I wanted to give up, but I am glad I did not. This was worth fighting for." We stood there together, watching the flag ripple in the evening breeze, and I felt at peace. The battle was over, the war was won, and life was good. The flagpole still stands in my front yard today, a symbol of honor, integrity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Every time I see it, I am reminded that one person can make a difference. All it takes is the courage to speak up, the determination to fight back, and the willingness to see things through to the end. That is the lesson I learned, and that is the lesson I hope to pass on to my children and to anyone else who finds themselves facing down a bully, whether it is an HOA president drunk on power or any other person who abuses their authority. Stand up, fight back, make a difference. It will not be easy, but it will be worth it. That is what the flagpole represents to me now, not just honor for my grandfather's service, but a reminder of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be pushed around. And that is a legacy worth leaving behind.